the first time Natalie Emerson saw Lucas Nash. He was standing in her father's bank with dust on his boots and a worn leather hat in his weathered hands, and something in her chest cracked open like an egg, revealing a world she had never dared to imagine. She was supposed to be upstairs in the private quarters, arranging flowers in crystal vases or embroidering pillowcases with her initials. But she had been drawn to the balcony, overlooking the main floor by the sound of her father's raised voice. It was 1883 in White Pine, Nevada, and the summer heat pressed against the windows like something alive and hungry. Lucas Nash did not belong in the marble halls of Emerson Bank. That much was clear from the way he shifted his weight from one boot to the other, uncomfortable beneath the glittering chandeliers that Natalie's father had imported from San Francisco at considerable expense. The cowboy's face was tanned from long days under the Nevada sun, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes were the color of sage in early morning light. He was perhaps 25 years old, though the lines around those eyes suggested he had lived more than his years should have allowed. "I understand your position, Mr. Emerson," Lucas was saying, his voice low and steady despite the banker's obvious agitation. "But my family has worked that land for 3 generations. My grandfather built that ranch with his own 2 hands when this was still just a mining camp. I am not asking for charity. I am asking for 3 more months to make good on the loan." Natalie's father, Richard Emerson, was a tall man with silver hair and a perfectly tailored suit that cost more than most families in White Pine earned in a year. He stood behind his ornate desk with his hands clasped behind his back, every inch the pillar of respectability and financial power. "Mr. Nash, I have been more than patient with your family. Your father defaulted on his obligations before he passed, and you have missed 3 payments already. The bank has its own obligations to consider." "My cattle got sick last winter," Lucas said, and Natalie could hear the controlled frustration in his tone. "I lost half my herd, but the spring calves are strong and I have a buyer lined up in Carson City. I just need a little more time." "The bank cannot operate on promises and good intentions." Her father's voice was cold, dismissive. "I have investors to answer to, Mr. Nash. The foreclosure notice has already been prepared. You have 30 days to vacate the property." Natalie watched Lucas's hands tighten around the brim of his hat, his knuckles going white. For a moment she thought he might argue further, might raise his voice or make threats the way some men did when they were desperate. But instead he simply nodded once, a tight jerking motion, and placed his hat back on his head. "Then I suppose there is nothing more to say." He turned and walked toward the door, his boots leaving faint prints of red Nevada dust on the polished floor. Natalie found herself moving before she consciously decided to, hurrying along the balcony and down the curved staircase that led to the ground floor. She reached the front entrance just as Lucas pushed through the heavy doors into the afternoon heat. "Wait," she called out, though she had no idea what she intended to say. Lucas turned, surprise flickering across his weathered face as he took in the sight of her. Natalie knew what she must look like standing there in her silk dress of deep emerald green, her dark hair pinned in an elaborate style that had taken her maid an hour to complete, pearls at her throat and wrists. She was 22 years old and had never spoken to a cowboy in her life. "Yes, miss," Lucas said, his tone polite but wary. Up close she could see the details her father's office had hidden. A small scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands, the way his shirt, though clean and carefully mended, was worn thin at the collar. "I heard what my father said about your ranch." "Then you know there is nothing to be done about it." Lucas's voice was flat, resigned. "I appreciate your concern, but unless you are in the business of making loans yourself, I had best be on my way." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of farewell and turned away again. Natalie watched him untie a paint horse from the hitching post outside the bank and swing himself into the saddle with an ease that spoke of countless hours spent riding. The horse was dusty and tired-looking, but well cared for despite its obvious age. Lucas Nash might be poor, but he was not careless. She stood in the doorway long after he had ridden out of sight, her heart beating faster than it should have been. Behind her, she heard her father's office door open and his footsteps approaching. "Natalie, what are you doing down here?" "I thought I asked you to stay upstairs when I have business to conduct." "I wanted some fresh air," she said, turning to face him. "Father, that man who was just here, the one with the ranch, could you not give him more time?" Richard Emerson's expression hardened. "This is not a matter for you to concern yourself with, Natalie. Banking is complicated business. That ranch has been failing for years. Lucas Nash is a dreamer, just like his father was. Dreams do not pay debts. But if he has a buyer for his cattle, enough." Her father's voice was sharp, brooking no argument. "You have no understanding of these matters. Now, I expect you to be dressed and ready by 6 o'clock this evening. Charles Whitmore is coming to dinner, and I want you to make a good impression." Charles Whitmore. The name landed in Natalie's stomach like a stone. He was the son of her father's business partner, a pale young man with soft hands who worked in the bank's Sacramento office and spoke incessantly about investment opportunities and market trends. Her father had been pushing for a match between them for months, and Charles had made his interest abundantly clear during his last visit, cornering her in the parlor and speaking at length about the advantages of uniting their two families. "Yes, father," Natalie said quietly, because there was no point in arguing. She had learned long ago that her opinions carried no weight in Richard Emerson's calculations. She went back upstairs to her rooms, past the paintings in gilded frames and the furniture shipped from the East Coast and the thick carpets that muffled every footstep. Her bedroom was larger than most houses in White Pine, filled with all the trappings of wealth that her father believed were so important. Silk dresses hung in her wardrobe, more than she could ever wear. Jewelry boxes overflowed with pearls and garnets and delicate gold chains. Books lined the shelves, proper books about proper subjects that young ladies were supposed to read. Natalie stood at her window and looked out at White Pine stretching below. The town had grown considerably since silver had been discovered in the surrounding mountains 15 years earlier. What had once been a rough mining camp now had paved streets and gas lamps, and 2 hotels that catered to investors from back east. Her father's bank stood at the center of it all, a monument to respectability and financial success. But beyond the neat streets of the town center, Natalie could see the wilder landscape of Nevada spreading out in all directions. Sagebrush and juniper dotted the hills. In the distance, mountains rose against the endless blue sky, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. Somewhere out there was the Nash Ranch, 3 generations of work and dreams about to be swept away because of missed payments and bad luck. She thought about Lucas Nash's hands, work-worn and strong. She thought about the quiet dignity in his voice even as her father dismissed him. She thought about the way he had looked standing in that marble-floored bank, completely out of place but refusing to show it. And she thought about her own hands, soft and useless, decorated with rings she had not chosen and did not want. The dinner with Charles Whitmore was every bit as tedious as Natalie had anticipated. He arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Lucas Nash's entire wardrobe, and immediately launched into a monologue about the bank's expansion plans. Natalie's father listened with approval, nodding along and occasionally interjecting with his own observations. They spoke about interest rates and property values and investment portfolios, while Natalie pushed food around her plate and tried to look interested. And of course, with the railroad coming through within the next 2 years, property values in White Pine are certain to increase substantially, Charles was saying. Your father and I have been discussing the acquisition of several key parcels. There is a ranch just outside of town that is about to go into foreclosure. Prime grazing land, excellent water access. We could subdivide it and sell lots to newcomers at considerable profit. Natalie's fork clattered against her plate. The Nash Ranch. Charles blinked at her, surprised that she had spoken. I believe that is the name, yes. Do you know it? I know that there is a family living there, a family that has worked that land for 3 generations. Natalie, her father said warningly, but she could not stop herself. I know that the man who owns it came to the bank today asking for more time, and that he has a plan to repay what he owes. Does that not matter? Charles smiled indulgently, the way one might smile at a child who had said something amusing but foolish. My dear Miss Emerson, I admire your compassionate nature. Truly, it speaks well of your character, but business cannot be conducted on sentiment alone. The Nash family has been mismanaging that property for years. In more capable hands, the land could be put to far better use. More profitable use, you mean? Profit is not a dirty word, Charles said, his smile never wavering. It is what allows your father to provide you with the comfortable life you enjoy. Surely you understand that. Natalie looked down at her plate, at the expensive china, and the food prepared by the cook her father employed, and the silver utensils that had been her mother's. Her mother, who had died when Natalie was 12, leaving her alone in this house full of beautiful things and empty rooms. Her mother, who had once told her that there was more to life than appearances and social standing, though she had never elaborated on what that something more might be. Of course, Natalie said quietly. I understand perfectly. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of meaningless conversation. Charles spoke about his plans for the future. Plans that clearly included Natalie, whether she wanted to be included or not. Her father encouraged him, practically promising her hand without bothering to ask her opinion. By the time Charles finally departed, with a lingering kiss to Natalie's hand and a meaningful look that made her skin crawl, she felt as though she might scream. He is very taken with you, her father said after the door had closed behind their guest. A match between you and Charles would be advantageous for everyone involved. The Whitmores are an excellent family, and Charles is well positioned to take over the Sacramento office. You would want for nothing, Natalie. I want for nothing now, Natalie said, the words coming out more sharply than she had intended. Is that not enough? Her father looked at her with something like genuine confusion. What more could you possibly need? You have everything a young woman could desire. Natalie looked around the parlor with its expensive furniture and its suffocating respectability. Yes, father, everything. She excused herself and went to bed, lying awake in her soft sheets and staring at the ceiling. The house was silent around her, empty except for the servants sleeping in their quarters on the 3rd floor. Outside her window, White Pine settled into the quiet of late evening. The saloons on the far edge of town still lit up and rowdy, but the respectable neighborhoods dark and still. Sleep would not come. Finally, as midnight approached, Natalie rose and dressed in her simplest day dress, a pale blue cotton that was still finer than anything most women in White Pine owned, but at least did not rustle with every movement. She crept down the stairs, avoiding the creaking floorboard on the landing, and let herself out through the kitchen door. The night air was cool and welcome after the heat of the day. Natalie stood in the garden behind the house, breathing in the scent of the roses her mother had planted years ago, and tried to understand the restlessness that had taken hold of her. She had always known that her life was planned out, that her father would choose a suitable husband, and she would marry and have children and live in a fine house somewhere. It was the natural order of things for a woman of her position. But she had never felt the weight of that future quite so heavily as she did standing in the garden at midnight, thinking about a cowboy with dusty boots and a failing ranch and hands that knew real work. Over the next few days, Natalie found herself thinking about Lucas Nash far more than was sensible or appropriate. She made discreet inquiries with the servants, learning that the Nash Ranch was about an hour's ride northeast of town, tucked into a valley where Robinson Creek ran year-round. The ranch house was small but sturdy, built by Lucas's grandfather in the early days when Nevada was still a territory. Lucas lived there alone now, working the land by himself since his father's death 2 years earlier. Poor fellow, the cook said, shaking her head as she kneaded bread dough. Lost his mother when he was just a boy, then his father to a bad heart. That ranch has been his whole life, and now your father is going to take it from him. The bank is simply collecting on a debt, Natalie said, repeating her father's words without conviction. The cook gave her a sharp look. There is what is legal and what is right, Miss Natalie, and they are not always the same thing. The words stayed with Natalie as she went through the motions of her days. She attended a ladies' tea where the conversation revolved around the latest fashions from San Francisco and who was courting whom. She sat through another dinner with Charles Whitmore, who seemed to think that their engagement was all but settled and spoke openly about where they would live after the wedding. She smiled and nodded and played the role of the dutiful daughter, while something inside her grew increasingly desperate and wild. A week after Lucas Nash's visit to the bank, Natalie made a decision that would have horrified her father if he had known about it. She told the household that she was going to visit her friend Margaret Wilson on the other side of town, a lie that came easily because Margaret was used to providing such alibis. Instead, Natalie went to the livery stable and paid a boy to saddle one of the horses her father kept for the rare occasions when he ventured out of town. "Are you sure you should be riding alone, Miss Emerson?" the stable boy asked, eyeing her uncertainly. "I am perfectly capable of handling a horse," Natalie said, which was true. She had learned to ride as a child and had been quite good at it before her father decided that young ladies of quality did not gallivant around the countryside on horseback. "I will only be gone a few hours." The boy helped her mount, and Natalie set off northeast, following the directions she had carefully memorized. The road out of White Pine was well traveled at first, passing by other ranches and mining claims, but it grew rougher and more isolated as she rode. The landscape here was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all golden grass and gray-green sage under the vast Nevada sky. She found the Nash Ranch shortly after noon, recognizing it from the description she had been given. The house was small and weathered but well-maintained, with a barn and several corrals nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance, sturdy animals with the distinctive red and white coloring of Herefords. A vegetable garden grew beside the house, surprisingly lush and green despite the summer heat. Natalie dismounted and tied her horse to a post outside the house, her heart hammering in her chest. What was she doing here? What did she think she could accomplish? But before she could talk herself into leaving, the front door opened and Lucas Nash stepped out onto the porch. He froze when he saw her, surprise and confusion flickering across his face. "Miss Emerson, what are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you," Natalie said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "About your ranch." Lucas looked at her for a long moment, then glanced past her as if checking to see if she had been followed. Does your father know you are here? No. Then I think you should leave. I appreciate whatever gesture this is, but I do not need anyone's pity. It is not pity, Natalie said quickly. Please, just hear me out. Lucas hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and the desire to send her away. Finally, he sighed and gestured toward the porch. Would you like to come inside? It is too hot to stand in the sun. The interior of the ranch house was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. A small kitchen occupied one corner, and Natalie could see a doorway leading to what must be a bedroom beyond. Everything was neat and orderly, the home of someone who took pride in what little they had. Lucas offered her water from a clay jug, and Natalie accepted gratefully. The ride had been longer than she expected, and the heat was intense. She drank deeply while Lucas watched her with those sage-colored eyes, waiting for her to explain herself. I have been thinking about what happened at the bank, Natalie said finally. About how my father refused to give you more time. It does not seem fair. Life is not fair, Miss Emerson. I learned that a long time ago. But there must be something that can be done. You said you have a buyer for your cattle. If you could just get an extension on the loan, your father made his position clear, Lucas interrupted. He wants this land, or more specifically, his business partner wants it. I heard Charles Whitmore has plans to subdivide and sell it off. Nothing I say or do is going to change that. Natalie set down her water glass, frustrated. So you are just going to give up? Walk away from everything your family built, Lucas's expression hardened. I am not giving up. I am facing reality. I have spent the last 2 years trying to keep this place running by myself, and it is not enough. I am one person, Miss Emerson. I cannot be in 10 places at once. The cattle need tending, the fences need mending, the crops need watering. My father had hired hands to help him, but I cannot afford to pay anyone. I have been doing the work of 4 men, and I am failing anyway. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Natalie saw the exhaustion in his face, the deep weariness of someone who had been fighting a losing battle for too long. Her heart ached for him in a way that was both unexpected and completely foreign to her experience. There has to be a way, she said softly. Let me think. Maybe I could talk to my father, convince him to reconsider. No. Lucas's voice was firm. I will not have you fighting my battles for me, and even if you could change his mind, which I doubt, what then? I still cannot run this ranch alone. The problems do not go away just because I get a few more months. He was right, of course. Natalie knew nothing about ranching or cattle or any of the practicalities he was describing. She was a banker's daughter who had spent her entire life in comfortable houses, whose biggest concern up until now had been which dress to wear to which social function. What help could she possibly offer? But as she looked around the simple ranch house, at the evidence of hard work and pride and determination, something crystallized in her mind. An idea that was absolutely insane and would destroy her reputation and infuriate her father and change everything about the careful, hollow life she had been living. What if you had help? She heard herself say. Lucas looked at her with obvious confusion. I just told you, I cannot afford to hire anyone. What if someone volunteered? Someone who could keep house and manage the daily chores while you focused on the cattle and the ranch work. Miss Emerson, no one is going to volunteer to work a failing ranch for free. That makes no sense. Natalie took a deep breath, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. I would. The silence that followed was absolute. Lucas stared at her as if she had suddenly sprouted a second head. You, the banker's daughter who probably has never cooked a meal or washed a dish in her entire life. You want to come work on my ranch? I could learn, Natalie said, the words tumbling out now in a rush. I am not stupid, Lucas. I can read and do mathematics and manage a household. Well, I have watched other people manage households, but I could figure it out. And you would have the time to focus on making the ranch successful again. This is insane, Lucas said flatly. Your father would never allow it, and even if he did, your reputation would be destroyed. An unmarried woman living on a ranch with an unmarried man. The entire town would talk. Let them talk. What do I care about their opinions? You should care. You would be ruined, Natalie. No decent man would want to marry you after something like that. It was the first time he had used her given name, and something warm sparked in her chest at the sound of it. What if I do not want to marry a decent man? What if I do not want the life my father has planned for me? Lucas shook his head slowly. You are talking about throwing away everything. Your home, your family, your position in society. For what? To play at being a rancher's wife for a few weeks until you realize how hard the work actually is. I am not playing at anything, Natalie said, surprised by the heat in her own voice. I am suffocating in that house, Lucas. I have been suffocating for years. Every day is the same. Pretty dresses and meaningless conversations, and pretending that I am satisfied with a life where nothing I think or feel or want matters to anyone. My father is planning to marry me off to Charles Whitmore, and I would rather die than spend the rest of my life as that man's wife. The words hung in the air between them. Lucas looked at her with an expression she could not quite read, something between disbelief and dawning understanding. You cannot mean that. I have never meant anything more in my life. Natalie stood up, pacing across the small room. I know how this sounds. I know you think I am some spoiled rich girl who has no idea what real work is like. And maybe you are right. Maybe I will be terrible at it. But at least I will have tried. At least I will have chosen something for myself, instead of having my entire life decided by other people. Lucas was quiet for a long time, studying her face as if trying to determine whether she was serious. Finally he said, even if I agreed to this madness, which I am not saying I am, your father would come after you. He would bring the sheriff. He would probably have me arrested for kidnapping or worse. Not if we were married. The words came out before Natalie had fully thought them through, but once they were spoken, she realized it was the only solution that made any sense. Lucas's eyes went wide. You want to marry me. You do not even know me. I know you are honest and hardworking and that you care about this land. I know you did not yell or make threats when my father refused to help you. I know you are trying to honor your family's legacy, even though it would be easier to just walk away. That is more than I know about Charles Whitmore after months of my father throwing us together. Natalie, marriage is not some game you can play when you are bored with your life. It is permanent, forever. I know that. She met his eyes steadily. I am not a child, Lucas. I understand what I am proposing, and I know it is not what you would have chosen if circumstances were different. But it could work. We could help each other. You get the help you need to save your ranch, and I get a life that is actually mine. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, clearly overwhelmed. This is crazy. You are crazy, maybe. But is it any crazier than losing your ranch because you are too proud to accept help? Is it any crazier than me spending the rest of my life as decoration in Charles Whitmore's house? She could see him wavering, see the desperate hope beginning to fight against his natural caution. Even if I agreed, even if we did this insane thing, there are problems you have not considered. I have no money to give you, no way to buy you pretty things or take you to fancy dinners. You would be working from dawn to dark just like I do, and there is no guarantee we would succeed. The ranch could still fail, and then where would we be? We would be together, Natalie said simply. We would have tried. Lucas stared at her for what felt like an eternity. She could see the battle playing out behind his eyes, logic and reason warring against the desperate need to save his family's land. Finally, slowly, he nodded. If we do this, we do it properly. I will not have you throwing away your reputation for nothing. We get married first, legal and binding, before you move out here. Agreed. And you have to be sure, Natalie. Once we do this, there is no going back. Your father will disown you. Society will turn on you. Life out here is hard in ways you cannot even imagine. You have to be absolutely certain this is what you want. Natalie thought about her father's house with its silk dresses and crystal vases. She thought about Charles Whitmore's soft hands and calculated smile. She thought about a future of afternoon teas and social obligations, and slowly withering away inside her gilded cage. And then she looked at Lucas Nash, really looked at him, at the strength in his weathered face and the kindness in his eyes despite all the hardship he had endured. I am certain, she said. They rode back to White Pine together as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Lucas wanted to do things properly, he said, which meant asking Richard Emerson for his daughter's hand in marriage even though they both knew what the answer would be. Natalie tried to argue that it was pointless, but Lucas was adamant. I will not start this by sneaking around like a criminal. We tell your father the truth, and we deal with whatever comes after. Richard Emerson was in his study when they arrived, going over ledgers with the kind of intense focus he usually reserved for large sums of money. He looked up when the butler announced visitors, his expression turning to shock, and then fury when he saw Natalie walking in with Lucas Nash. What is the meaning of this? Richard demanded, rising from his chair. Natalie, where have you been? And what is he doing here? Father, I need to speak with you, Natalie said, trying to keep her voice calm. It is important. You will speak to me about your inappropriate behavior, young lady. I have had 3 people tell me they saw you riding out of town alone this afternoon. Have you lost your mind? The scandal, Mr. Emerson, Lucas interrupted quietly. I have come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Emerson's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple. You have what? I want to marry Natalie, sir. With your permission, though I will marry her without it if necessary. Permission, permission. Richard's voice rose to a near shout. You come into my home, you who cannot even pay your debts, you who I am foreclosing on, and you ask to marry my daughter. This is absurd. This is insulting. Get out of my house. Father, please listen, Natalie began. You be quiet, her father snapped. I will deal with you after this nobody leaves. As for you, Mr. Nash, if you are not gone in the next 30 seconds, I will have you thrown out. Lucas did not move. I love your daughter, sir. It was a lie, of course. They barely knew each other. But the words still sent a thrill through Natalie's chest, a preview of what might be possible if they could just get through this moment. Richard Emerson laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You love her. How touching. You love her wealth, more likely. You love the idea of getting your hands on my money and using it to save your pathetic little ranch. Did you really think I would fall for such an obvious scheme? It is not a scheme, Natalie said, stepping forward. I want this, Father. I want to marry Lucas. You want? Her father turned his fury on her. Since when do you know what you want? You are a child who has been sheltered and protected your entire life. You have no idea what you are saying. I am 22 years old, Father. I am not a child. Then stop acting like one. This man is using you, Natalie. He sees you as a way out of his financial problems. Nothing more. Once he has secured your hand, he will expect me to pay off his debts and finance his failing ranch. Well, I will not do it. I will not be manipulated by some dusty cowboy who thinks he can seduce my daughter into saving him. That is not what this is, Lucas said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I do not want your money, Mr. Emerson. I have never wanted anything from you except basic human decency, which apparently is too much to ask. Get out." "Father, if you do not allow this, I will simply leave with him anyway," Natalie said. "I am of age. You cannot stop me." Richard Emerson looked at his daughter with an expression that was equal parts rage and something that might have been hurt if Natalie had not known better. "If you walk out that door with him, you are no longer my daughter. Do you understand me? I will disown you completely. No money, no inheritance, nothing. You will be on your own." "I understand. You will be a rancher's wife, Natalie. Do you have any idea what that means? You will spend your days cooking and cleaning and hauling water. You will wear the same dress day after day because you will not be able to afford new ones. You will work until your hands bleed and your back aches. And for what? So you can watch that ranch fail anyway and end up with nothing." "Maybe," Natalie said steadily. "Or maybe we will succeed. Either way, it will be my choice." Her father stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then he turned away, moving to the window that overlooked his carefully manicured garden. "I thought I raised you better than this. Your mother would be ashamed." The words were meant to wound, and they did, but Natalie forced herself to stand firm. "Mother told me there was more to life than appearances and social standing. Maybe this is what she meant." "Your mother died in this house, surrounded by comfort and security," Richard said coldly. "She never would have thrown that away for some romantic fantasy." "We will never know, will we?" Natalie walked over to Lucas, taking his hand in hers. His palm was rough and warm, and his fingers closed around hers with gentle strength. "I am sorry it has to be this way, Father, but I am leaving with Lucas. We will be married as soon as possible." Richard Emerson did not turn around. "Then go, and do not come back. As of this moment, you are not my daughter." Natalie had thought she was prepared for those words, but hearing them spoken out loud still felt like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, and Lucas's arm came around her waist, steadying her. "Come on," he said quietly. "There is nothing more to say here." They left the study together, walking through the marble halls of the house Natalie had grown up in. Servants watched from doorways, their faces shocked and sympathetic. The butler opened the front door for them, and Natalie saw tears in his old eyes as he whispered, "Good luck, Miss Natalie." Outside, the evening air was cooling, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Natalie stood on the front steps of her father's bank and home, looking up at the building that had always represented security and respectability and everything she was supposed to want, and she felt nothing but relief. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, his voice gentle. "I think so," Natalie said. "It is strange. I thought I would feel sadder, but mostly I just feel free." Lucas studied her face in the fading light. "We should find somewhere for you to stay tonight, somewhere proper. I can pay for a room at the hotel, and then tomorrow we can figure out the rest. We could ride back to your ranch tonight. No, we do this right, Natalie. We get married first, like I said. I will not give your father or anyone else reason to spread ugly rumors about you. I think they will spread rumors regardless, probably, but at least we will know the truth." They went to the hotel, where Lucas used most of his remaining money to secure Natalie a room for the night. The clerk's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he saw them together, and Natalie knew that by morning, all of White Pine would know that Richard Emerson's daughter had run off with the cowboy her father was foreclosing on. The scandal would be magnificent. Lucas walked her up to her room, his hat in his hands again, looking uncomfortable in the carpeted hallway. "I will come by first thing in the morning," he said. "We can go to the justice of the peace and get married. It will not be fancy." "I do not want fancy," Natalie interrupted. "I just want it to be real." Something in Lucas's expression softened. "It will be real, I promise you that." He hesitated, then added, "Natalie, are you absolutely sure about this? Once we are married, that is it. There is no changing your mind when things get hard." "I am sure." She reached out and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "I know this is not what you planned. I know you are only agreeing because you need help with the ranch. But I will work hard, Lucas. I will learn everything I need to know. I will not let you down." Lucas caught her hand in his, holding it against his cheek for a moment. "You already did something I could never have done. You stood up to your father and chose your own path. That takes more courage than anything I have ever done." He left her then, heading back to his ranch to do the evening chores and prepare for the changes tomorrow would bring. Natalie lay awake in the hotel bed, listening to the sounds of white pines settling into night. The room was plain and simple compared to her bedroom at her father's house, but somehow it felt more honest, more real. She thought about what lay ahead. The work, the uncertainty, the very real possibility of failure. She thought about her father's words, about how her hands would bleed and her back would ache. She thought about all the things she did not know how to do, all the ways she might disappoint Lucas and prove herself useless on the ranch. But she also thought about the look in Lucas's eyes when he had stood in her father's study and refused to back down. She thought about his gentle hands and quiet strength. She thought about waking up every morning with purpose, with real work to do and real challenges to face. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was making the right choice. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the Nevada sun already warm by the time Lucas arrived at the hotel. He was wearing what was clearly his best shirt, still worn but clean and pressed, and he had shaved and combed his hair. Natalie met him in the hotel lobby wearing the same blue dress from yesterday, the only clothes she had since she had not gone back to her father's house for her belongings. "Ready?" Lucas asked, offering his arm. "Ready," Natalie confirmed, taking it. They walked through white pine to the justice of the peace's office, drawing stares from everyone they passed. Natalie held her head high, refusing to show any shame or doubt. Let them look. Let them judge. She was doing exactly what she wanted to do for the first time in her life. The justice of the peace was an older man named Henry Carter who had known Lucas's father. He looked surprised when they explained what they wanted, but he did not ask questions or make judgments. "You got a ring?" he asked Lucas. Lucas's face fell. "No, sir, I did not think here." Natalie pulled a simple gold band off her own finger, one her mother had given her years ago. "Use this. Natalie, that is yours, and now it is ours." The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Nothing like the elaborate wedding Natalie's father had probably been planning with Charles Whitmore. There were no flowers or music or guests in fancy clothes. Just 3 people in a small office, speaking words that bound 2 lives together. When it came time for Lucas to place the ring on her finger, his hand was shaking slightly. Natalie looked up at him and smiled, trying to tell him without words that everything would be all right. He smiled back, tentative but genuine, and slipped the ring onto her finger. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Henry Carter said. "You may kiss your bride." Lucas hesitated, clearly uncertain, and Natalie realized that despite everything they were doing, they had not actually kissed yet. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, brief and chaste but meaningful. His lips were warm and gentle, and when they pulled apart, his eyes were full of wonder. "Well then," Henry said, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Nash. I wish you both all the luck in the world. I have a feeling you are going to need it." They left the office as husband and wife, the marriage certificate safely tucked into Lucas's pocket. Natalie felt strange and light, as if she might float away at any moment. She was married. She was Natalie Nash now, no longer a banker's daughter but a rancher's wife. "We should get you some practical clothes before we head to the ranch," Lucas said. "That dress is beautiful, but you will ruin it doing ranch work." They went to the general store, where Lucas bought her 2 simple cotton dresses, sturdy boots, a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun, and an apron. The total cost made him wince, but he paid without complaint. The shopkeeper's wife packaged everything up while staring at Natalie with undisguised curiosity. "It is true, then?" the woman finally asked. "You married Lucas Nash. Richard Emerson's daughter married a cowboy." "It is true," Natalie said calmly, "and I am very happy about it." The woman looked like she wanted to say more but thought better of it. They left the store with Natalie's new clothes and headed to the livery stable to retrieve Lucas's horse and the one Natalie had borrowed the day before. The stable boy helped Natalie mount, his expression carefully neutral, and they set off toward the Nash ranch. The ride felt different this time, more permanent. Yesterday Natalie had been visiting, exploring a possibility. Today she was going home, her home now, for better or worse. The landscape looked the same, all sage and grass and endless sky, but Natalie tried to see it with new eyes. This was her world now, and she needed to learn everything about it. When they reached the ranch, Lucas helped her down from her horse and stood looking at her with an expression of mingled hope and anxiety. "Welcome home, Mrs. Nash." "Thank you, Mr. Nash," Natalie said, and they both laughed a little at the formality. Lucas showed her around the property properly this time, explaining the layout and the daily routine. The cattle needed to be checked twice a day, morning and evening. The vegetable garden needed watering every day in the summer heat. The chickens needed feeding and their eggs collected. The horses needed tending. Fences always needed mending somewhere. It was an endless cycle of work, and Natalie could see why Lucas had been struggling to keep up with it all alone. "I will start teaching you everything," Lucas said. "It will take time, but you are smart. You will learn." "What should I start with? How about cooking? I have been living on beans and bacon for months, and I would not mind a proper meal." Natalie followed Lucas into the ranch house kitchen, looking at the wood-burning stove with something approaching panic. She had never cooked anything in her life. The cook at her father's house had handled all of that, and Natalie had never been allowed in the kitchen beyond occasionally sneaking treats as a child. "The trick is keeping the temperature steady," Lucas explained, showing her how to adjust the dampers and add wood to maintain the fire. "Too hot and everything burns. Too cold and nothing cooks through." He showed her his meager supplies: flour, salt, lard, dried beans, a little bacon, some potatoes from the garden. "It is not much," he admitted. "I usually go to town once a month for supplies, but I have been putting it off because I did not have the money." "Show me how to make something simple," Natalie said. "I will practice." Lucas talked her through making biscuits, a process that involved mixing flour and lard and water in proportions that he measured by feel rather than precise amounts. Natalie tried to follow his instructions, but her first attempt resulted in lumps of dough that were simultaneously too dry and too wet. "Like this," Lucas said, moving behind her to guide her hands. His chest was warm against her back, and Natalie found herself acutely aware of his presence, of the fact that they were married now, and this was not improper. "You need to work the dough until it comes together, but not too much or it will be tough." After several attempts, they produced a batch of biscuits that were at least edible if not particularly good. Lucas ate 3 of them without complaint, declaring them the best biscuits he had ever tasted, which was such an obvious lie that Natalie laughed until tears ran down her face. "I am sorry," she gasped. "I will get better, I promise." "You are doing fine," Lucas assured her. "Everything takes practice." Over the next few weeks, Natalie learned what hard work truly meant. She rose before dawn to help Lucas with the morning chores, feeding chickens and collecting eggs and helping bring water up from the creek for the garden. Her hands, soft from years of leisure, blistered and then calloused. Her back ached from bending over the vegetable rows. The Nevada sun burned her face and arms despite the hat Lucas had bought her. She learned to cook, slowly and with many failures. She burned dinner more times than she could count. She made bread that was hard as rocks and stew that was too salty and eggs that were somehow rubbery and undercooked at the same time. But Lucas never complained, never made her feel foolish for not knowing things that seemed basic to him. He was patient and kind, showing her again and again how to do things until she started to get the hang of it. She learned to wash clothes in the big tub behind the house, scrubbing at stains until her knuckles were raw. She learned to mend socks and patch worn shirts, her embroidery skills finally put to practical use. She learned to identify which plants in the garden needed more water and which were being attacked by insects. It was exhausting work, harder than anything Natalie had ever done. But it was also deeply satisfying in a way she had never experienced. At the end of each day, she could see what she had accomplished. Clean clothes hanging on the line, a meal on the table, even if it was not perfect, a basket of fresh vegetables from the garden. These were tangible results, real contributions to their survival. And slowly, quietly, she began to fall in love with her husband. It happened in small moments. The way Lucas thanked her for every meal, no matter how badly she had burned it. The way he left wildflowers on the kitchen table, picked during his morning ride to check the cattle. The way he taught her to ride properly, his hands steady on her waist as he helped her learn to handle her horse with confidence. The way he looked at her in the evenings when they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, as if he still could not quite believe she was real. They had married for practical reasons, to save the ranch and give Natalie an escape from a life she did not want. But something deeper was growing between them, something that had nothing to do with necessity and everything to do with genuine affection and respect. Lucas felt it too. Natalie could tell by the way his eyes followed her as she moved around the kitchen, the way he found excuses to touch her hand or brush past her in the narrow hallways of the ranch house. They were still careful with each other, still learning the boundaries of this relationship that had begun so unconventionally. But the attraction was undeniable, simmering just below the surface of every interaction. One evening about a month after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sky turn purple and gold. Lucas had been quieter than usual all day, and Natalie had been trying to figure out if something was wrong. "I have been thinking," Lucas said finally, "about us. About this arrangement." Natalie's heart sank. "Are you regretting it? Am I not doing enough to help?" "What? No, that is not." Lucas turned to look at her, his expression earnest. "Natalie, you have done more than I ever could have asked. The house is cleaner than it has been in years. The garden is thriving. You have taken on every task I have given you without complaint. That is not the problem." "Then what is?" Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Natalie had learned meant he was nervous. "We got married to save the ranch. That was the agreement. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being just an arrangement for me. Natalie, I have grown to care for you, more than I probably should, given how this all started." Natalie felt warmth spreading through her chest. "I care for you too, Lucas. I know we have been careful with each other. Respectful. But we are married and I want—" He stopped, clearly struggling for the right words. "I want this to be a real marriage, Natalie, if you want that too, but I will not pressure you. You have given up so much already. I do not want you to feel like you owe me anything more." Natalie reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Lucas, I chose to marry you. I chose to come here. And I am choosing this now. I want our marriage to be real too." Lucas looked at her with such hope and relief that Natalie felt her breath catch. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and kissed her. It was different from the brief kiss at their wedding, deeper and more certain. Natalie kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his face, feeling the warmth of his skin and the scratch of his stubble. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Natalie whispered. Lucas stood and took her hand, leading her inside the ranch house to the bedroom they had been sharing, but only in the most technical sense. Lucas always carefully staying on his side of the bed and Natalie on hers. But tonight was different. Tonight they came together as husband and wife in truth, and Natalie discovered that intimacy could be tender and passionate, and nothing at all like the clinical descriptions she had read in books, or the vague warnings older women had given her. Afterward, lying in Lucas's arms with his heart beating steady beneath her ear, Natalie felt completely at peace for the first time in her life. This was where she belonged. Not in her father's mansion with its silk dresses and hollow conversations, but here in this simple ranch house with this good man who had shown her what it meant to work for something, to fight for something, to choose your own path. "I love you," Lucas said softly into the darkness. "I probably should not say it yet, but I do. I love you, Natalie." "I love you too," Natalie replied, the words coming easily because they were true. "Thank you for letting me choose you." "Thank you for choosing me," Lucas said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I am the luckiest man in Nevada." The next few months tested that luck considerably. Lucas had been right when he said the ranch's problems did not disappear just because he had help now. The bank's foreclosure deadline was still looming, and they needed to get the cattle to market in Carson City if they had any hope of paying off enough of the debt to negotiate new terms. Lucas spent long hours preparing for the cattle drive, separating out the animals that were ready for sale and organizing the logistics of moving them across Nevada's rough terrain. Natalie helped where she could, though she was still learning about cattle and often felt more like a hindrance than a help. "You are doing fine," Lucas assured her after she accidentally spooked a cow that then spooked several others, creating chaos in the corral. "Cattle are stupid and stubborn. They spook at everything." "I feel like I should be more useful," Natalie said, frustrated with herself. "You are useful. You keep the house running so I can focus on this. That is what we agreed, remember?" But Natalie wanted to do more. She studied the ranch's finances, such as they were, trying to understand exactly how much money they needed and how close Lucas's cattle sale would get them. The numbers were not encouraging. Even if everything went perfectly, they would still be short of what they owed the bank. An idea began forming in her mind, one that she knew Lucas would hate, but that might be their only option. She waited until one evening when he was relaxed, freshly washed after a day working in the sun, before broaching the subject. "Lucas, I have been looking at the numbers. Even if you sell all the cattle you have planned at a good price, we are still going to be short about $300. Lucas sighed. "I know. I have been trying not to think about it. What if I went to my father and asked for the money? Absolutely not." Lucas's response was immediate and firm. "I will not have you begging your father for anything. That is not why I married you. I know that. But Lucas, we have to be practical. $300 is not an impossible amount. If I could just talk to him, explain that we have a solid plan. Your father disowned you, Natalie. He told you never to come back. Do you really think he is going to help us now? Maybe not. But I have to try. We have worked too hard to lose everything because of pride." Lucas stood up and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. "It is not just pride. I do not want you to be hurt again. The way your father spoke to you, the things he said, I will not let you put yourself through that." Natalie went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her cheek against his back. "I appreciate you wanting to protect me, but I am stronger than you think. And this ranch is my home now. I want to fight for it." She felt Lucas's sigh more than heard it. "If you do this, I am coming with you. He might be more willing to listen if I talk to him alone. I do not care. I am not letting you face him by yourself." In the end, Natalie agreed to let Lucas come with her, though she suspected his presence would make her father less likely to help. They made the trip to White Pine on a Saturday morning, leaving early to avoid the worst of the day's heat. Natalie had not been back to town since their wedding, and she felt strange riding down the familiar streets knowing that everything had changed. People stared at them as they passed, some openly hostile and others merely curious. Natalie heard whispers, caught the word disgrace more than once. She kept her head high, refusing to show that their judgment affected her. They tied their horses outside her father's bank, and Natalie took a deep breath before heading inside. The interior looked exactly the same as it had the day Lucas first came asking for more time on his loan. All marble and crystal and intimidating displays of wealth. The clerk at the front desk's eyes widened when he saw them. "Miss Emerson, I mean Mrs. Nash. I did not expect. Is my father here?" Natalie asked. "He is, but I do not know if he will see you. Tell him I am here, please." The clerk disappeared into the back offices, and Natalie and Lucas waited in uncomfortable silence. Several long minutes passed before the clerk returned, looking nervous. "He says you have 5 minutes." Richard Emerson was standing behind his desk when they entered his office, his expression cold and unyielding. He looked older than he had 2 months ago, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. For a moment, Natalie felt a pang of guilt. But then she remembered his harsh words, his absolute refusal to hear her out, and the guilt faded. "Father," she said quietly, "thank you for seeing me. I am only seeing you because I want to make it clear that my position has not changed," Richard said. "You made your choice, Natalie. Now you must live with it. I understand that. I am not here to ask you to take me back or to reconcile. I am here on business." Her father's eyebrow raised slightly. "Business? Lucas has a buyer for his cattle in Carson City. But even after the sale, we will still be short on what we owe the bank. I came to ask if you would be willing to extend the loan by $300, to be paid back within 6 months at whatever interest rate you deem fair." Richard Emerson laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You want me to loan you money? After you defied me, humiliated me in front of the entire town, and threw away everything I gave you? I am not asking for a gift. This would be a legitimate business transaction. Lucas's ranch is viable. He just needs a little more time. The Nash ranch has been failing for years. Everyone knows it. Loaning you money would be throwing it away." "That is not true," Lucas said, speaking for the first time. "The ranch struggled because I could not manage it alone, but with Natalie's help, we have turned things around. The cattle are healthy, the property is well maintained. We are making it work." "Are you?" Richard looked at his daughter, his gaze taking in her sun-darkened skin, her calloused hands, the simple cotton dress that was a far cry from the silk gown she used to wear. "You look like a field hand, Natalie. Is this what you wanted? To work yourself to the bone for a man who has nothing to offer you?" "He offers me respect and partnership," Natalie said. "He offers me a real life where my thoughts and efforts matter. That is more than I ever had living with you." Her father flinched as if she had struck him. "I gave you everything. You gave me things, Father, but you never gave me a choice. You never asked what I wanted or what would make me happy. You just assumed that a big house and nice clothes would be enough. And this is enough." Richard gestured dismissively. Living in poverty, ruining your hands with manual labor, being ostracized by society. Yes, Natalie said simply. It is enough. More than enough. Richard Emerson stared at her for a long moment, and Natalie thought she saw something like regret flicker across his face. But then his expression hardened again. The answer is no. I will not loan you money, and I will not extend the deadline on the ranch. You have until the end of the month, as previously stated. If you cannot pay, the property will be seized and sold. Please, Father, just $300. That is nothing to you. It is the principle, Natalie. You made your bed, now lie in it. He turned away from them, looking out his office window at the town he controlled. Your 5 minutes are up. Please leave. Natalie felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. She would not give her father the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Thank you for your time, she said, her voice steady despite the crushing disappointment. Goodbye, Father. She walked out of the office with Lucas at her side, through the bank's marble halls for what might be the last time. Outside, the Nevada sun was bright and merciless. Natalie stood on the steps trying to gather herself and felt Lucas's arm come around her shoulders. I am sorry, he said softly. I know that was hard. I knew he would say no. I just hoped. She stopped, shaking her head. It does not matter. We will find another way. Natalie, maybe we should face facts. Even if the cattle sale goes well, it might not be enough. And if we lose the ranch, we are not going to lose the ranch, Natalie said fiercely. I did not leave my father's house and give up everything I knew just to fail now. We will find a way, Lucas. I promise you. She could see he wanted to argue, wanted to prepare her for the possibility of losing, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he just nodded and helped her onto her horse, and they rode back to the ranch in silence. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked harder than ever. Lucas spent dawn to dusk preparing the cattle for the drive to Carson City, while Natalie managed everything else. She rose before the sun to get breakfast ready, then worked in the garden, fed the chickens, hauled water, did laundry, mended clothes, and prepared dinner. By the time she fell into bed each night, she was too exhausted to even dream. But exhaustion could not stop her mind from working on the problem. $300. They needed $300. Lucas had nothing left to sell except things they needed to run the ranch. Natalie had her jewelry, but most of it had been left behind at her father's house, and what little she had brought was not worth much. One evening, as she was going through a box of her mother's things that she had managed to save, Natalie found something unexpected. A small leather journal, filled with her mother's handwriting. She had never seen it before and assumed her father must have packed it with her things by mistake. Natalie sat on the porch and read by lamplight, discovering a side of her mother she had never known. Her mother had not been happy in her marriage. She had felt stifled and controlled, trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow within. She had loved Natalie desperately and had wanted better for her daughter, though she had not known how to achieve it. One entry in particular struck Natalie. I have saved what I can over the years, hidden away where Richard will not find it. It is not much, but perhaps someday it will help Natalie have the choices I never did. The money is in a private account at the bank in Carson City, under my maiden name. I pray she finds this and knows that I wanted her to be free. Natalie read the passage 3 times, her heart pounding. A private account in Carson City, under her mother's maiden name, which was Sullivan. It might be nothing. The account might have been closed years ago, or her father might have found it and emptied it, but it might also be the answer to their prayers. She showed the journal to Lucas, watching his face as he read the entry. Do you think it is real? He asked. I do not know. But we are going to Carson City anyway for the cattle sale. We could check while we are there. Even if the account exists, the bank might not let you access it. You were not even born when your mother opened it. My mother's maiden name was Sullivan. My middle name is Sullivan. And I have her wedding ring. That has to count for something. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. Lucas agreed to leave for Carson City 3 days earlier than planned, giving them time to investigate the bank account before the cattle sale. They left the ranch before dawn, pushing hard to cover the ground as quickly as possible. The journey to Carson City took nearly 2 full days of riding. They camped one night under the stars, Lucas keeping watch while Natalie tried to sleep on the hard ground. It was uncomfortable and nerve-wracking, but also strangely intimate. Lying beneath the vast Nevada sky with Lucas beside her, Natalie felt more married to him than she had during any moment in church or their ranch house. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noticing she was still awake. "How strange life is. 3 months ago I was sleeping in a soft bed with silk sheets and I thought I was miserable. Now I am sleeping on the ground and I have never been happier." Lucas smiled, reaching over to take her hand. "You are remarkable, you know that. I am not. I am just stubborn." "You are both." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Get some sleep, Natalie. Tomorrow might be a long day." They reached Carson City in the late afternoon, dusty and tired but determined. The town was larger than White Pine, bustling with activity from the nearby Comstock lode mining operations. They found the bank her mother had mentioned, a solid brick building on the main street. Inside, Natalie approached the clerk with her mother's journal in hand. "I would like to inquire about an account. It would have been opened about 25 years ago under the name Mary Sullivan." The clerk looked skeptical, but agreed to check the records. He disappeared into a back room for what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral. "We do have an account under that name, but I will need proof of your identity before I can allow you access." Natalie showed him her mother's ring, the journal entries, and her own identification papers that listed her middle name as Sullivan. The clerk studied everything carefully, then consulted with the bank manager. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they agreed to let her access the account. "The current balance is $432, the bank manager said. "Your mother made regular deposits for several years, then the account went dormant. We have been holding it per her instructions that it should only be released to her daughter." Natalie felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. $432. More than enough to cover what they needed. More than enough to save the ranch. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, his hand on her shoulder. "She did this for me," Natalie whispered. "My mother. She saved this money so I could have choices, so I could be free." "She would be proud of you," Lucas said softly. "She would be proud of the choice you made." Natalie withdrew $350, leaving the rest in the account as a reserve in case they needed it later. The bank manager arranged the paperwork, and Natalie and Lucas walked out into the evening light with a bank draft that represented hope and survival. The cattle sale went smoothly 2 days later. Lucas's buyer was satisfied with the quality of the animals and paid a fair price. Combined with the money from her mother's account, they had enough to pay off the bank loan completely with a little left over for operating expenses. They stayed in Carson City one more night to finalize all the paperwork, then rode back to White Pine with the paid-off loan documents safely tucked in Lucas's saddlebag. The journey felt different this time, lighter somehow. They were going home, truly home, to a ranch that was secure and a future that was theirs to build. When they reached White Pine, Lucas insisted on going straight to the bank. Richard Emerson was behind his desk when they walked in, and his expression turned thunderous when he saw them. "I told you not to come back." "We are not here to argue, Mr. Emerson," Lucas said calmly. "We are here to pay off the loan on my ranch, in full." He placed the bank draft on Richard's desk, along with the receipts from the cattle sale. Richard stared at the papers as if they might be a trick, his face going through several shades of confusion and anger. "Where did you get this money?" he demanded. "That is none of your concern," Natalie said. "What matters is that the debt is paid. The ranch belongs to us, free and clear." Richard looked between the two of them, clearly trying to understand what had happened. "I do not know what scheme you two have cooked up." "There is no scheme," Lucas interrupted. "The money is legitimate. You can verify the bank draft with Carson City if you do not believe us. Now please process the payment so we can be done with this." It took Richard Emerson another 20 minutes of checking and rechecking everything before he finally, grudgingly, accepted the payment and marked the loan as satisfied. He handed Lucas the deed to the ranch, his movements stiff and angry. "You think you have won," Richard said. "But running a ranch takes more than paying off one loan. You will be back here within a year begging for more money." "No, Father, we will not," Natalie said, "because we work together. Because we respect each other and build each other up instead of tearing each other down. That is something you never understood." She turned and walked out of the bank with Lucas at her side, leaving her father standing alone in his office. They mounted their horses and rode out of town, back toward the ranch that was truly theirs now. The sun was setting, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. "We did it," Lucas said, his voice full of wonder. "I cannot believe we actually did it." "I told you we would find a way," Natalie said, smiling at him. "You did. You were right." Lucas reached over and took her hand, pulling her closer so he could kiss her right there on horseback, not caring who might see. "I love you, Natalie Nash. I love your stubbornness and your courage and your absolute refusal to accept defeat." "I love you too," Natalie said, kissing him back. "Now let us go home." Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm over the following months. The pressure of potential foreclosure lifted. Lucas and Natalie threw themselves into making the ranch not just survive, but thrive. They used the remaining money from her mother's account to buy more cattle, young stock that would grow and breed and expand their herd. Lucas hired a ranch hand, a young man named Tom who was grateful for steady work and proved to be hardworking and reliable. Natalie's skills as a rancher's wife improved dramatically. Her cooking became genuinely good, her bread light and her stews flavorful. She learned to preserve vegetables from the garden for the winter months. She learned to recognize when a cow was about to calve and how to help if there were complications. She learned to ride well enough to help Lucas move the cattle between pastures. Her hands were permanently calloused now, her skin tanned despite her best efforts to wear a hat. Her silk dresses were long gone, replaced by practical cotton and denim. She wore her hair in a simple braid instead of elaborate styles. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. But she had never been happier. Word of their success spread through White Pine and the surrounding areas. Other ranchers who had dismissed Lucas as a dreamer began to respect him. Women who had gossiped about Natalie's scandalous marriage began to grudgingly admire her. It turned out that success had a way of changing people's opinions, not that Natalie cared much about society's opinions anymore. She had discovered that life was much simpler when you stopped worrying about what other people thought and focused on building something real with the person you loved. She and Lucas grew closer every day, their partnership deepening into genuine intimacy and affection. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night. They talked for hours about their dreams for the ranch, about expanding the herd, about maybe building a larger house someday. They were building a life together, brick by brick and day by day. One morning in early winter, Natalie woke feeling strangely ill. She made it outside before being sick, and Lucas found her there, pale and shaking. "Are you all right? Should I ride for the doctor?" "I do not think that is necessary," Natalie said slowly, a suspicion forming in her mind. "Lucas, when was my last monthly bleeding?" He looked at her blankly for a moment, then understanding dawned on his face. "Are you saying do you think you might be pregnant?" Natalie finished. "I think I might be pregnant." Lucas's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, fear, and finally joy. "A baby. We are going to have a baby, maybe. I am not certain yet, but the timing would be right." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "This is incredible." "Terrifying, but incredible. Are you happy about it?" "Yes," Natalie said, and realized it was true. "Yes, I am happy." They rode to town the next week to see the doctor, who confirmed what Natalie already knew. She was about 3 months along, which meant the baby would come sometime in the late spring. The doctor gave her some basic advice about rest and nutrition, and sent them on their way with congratulations. As they were leaving the doctor's office, they nearly ran into Charles Whitmore on the street. He was in town on business, apparently, looking prosperous and self-satisfied in his expensive suit. His expression when he saw Natalie was complicated, mixing contempt with something that might have been regret. "Miss Emerson," he said, then corrected himself with obvious distaste. "Mrs. Nash, I heard you were still in the area." "Where else would I be?" Natalie asked. "This is my home." Charles looked her up and down, taking in her simple clothes and work-worn appearance. "I must say, I am surprised you have stuck it out this long. I thought for certain you would come to your senses and return to civilization." "This is civilization," Natalie said calmly. "Or at least it is my version of it. Your father is quite disappointed in you, you know. He had such high hopes." "My father's hopes were his own, not mine. If you will excuse us, Mr. Whitmore, we have business to attend to." She took Lucas's arm and started to walk past, but Charles called after them. "I hope you know what you are giving up, Natalie. You could have had everything. Now look at you, a common rancher's wife with dirt under her fingernails." Natalie stopped and turned back to face him, her hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "I have everything I need, Charles. A husband who respects me, work that matters, and a child on the way. That is more than I ever would have had with you." Charles's face flushed red. "Your child will grow up poor and uncultured, just like his father." "Our child will grow up loved and free," Natalie corrected. "Which is more important than all the money in Nevada." Lucas's hand tightened on her arm, and she could feel the tension in his body. "We are done here, Natalie. Let us go." They walked away, leaving Charles Whitmore standing on the street looking affronted and bewildered. Lucas was quiet until they reached their horses, then he turned to Natalie with an expression of fierce pride. "You are amazing. Do you know that?" "I just told the truth," Natalie said. "You did more than that. You defended our life together without hesitation. You chose us again, even when he was offering you a way back to your old world." "There is nothing in my old world I want, Lucas. Everything I care about is right here." Winter passed slowly, the Nevada landscape harsh and unforgiving but beautiful in its starkness. Natalie continued working as much as she could, though Lucas became increasingly protective as her pregnancy progressed. He tried to keep her from heavy lifting or long hours on her feet, which led to several arguments about her capability and independence. "I am pregnant, not helpless," Natalie insisted after Lucas refused to let her help with mucking out the stables. "I know that, but I worry." "Women die in childbirth, Natalie. I cannot lose you." His vulnerability in that moment broke through her irritation. She softened, touching his face gently. "You are not going to lose me. I am strong, Lucas, stronger than I ever was before I came here. I know you are. But let me take care of you anyway. Please." So Natalie reluctantly scaled back her activities, focusing on the lighter household work and leaving the heavier ranch chores to Lucas and Tom. She spent her time cooking and preserving food, preparing for the baby, and generally driving herself slightly crazy with enforced rest. In February, something unexpected happened. A carriage arrived at the ranch, an expensive vehicle that looked completely out of place in the rough Nevada landscape. Natalie watched from the porch as it approached, her heart sinking when she saw the crest on the door. Her father's carriage. But it was not her father who stepped out. It was an older woman Natalie recognized as Mrs. Patterson, her father's housekeeper. She was carrying a large trunk that she set down on the porch with obvious effort. "Mrs. Nash," she said formally, though her eyes were kind. "I have come from your father's house. Did he send you?" Natalie asked warily. "Not exactly. Your father does not know I am here." Mrs. Patterson opened the trunk, revealing all of Natalie's belongings from her old room. The silk dresses, the jewelry, the books and personal items she had left behind. "I thought you might want these, especially now with the baby coming." "How did you know about the baby?" News travels, even when people try to keep secrets. "Your father knows too, though he will not admit it." Mrs. Patterson smiled softly. "He asks about you, you know. When he thinks no one is listening. He looks out the window at night toward this direction. I think he regrets how things ended, but he is too proud to say so." Natalie felt unexpected tears prickling her eyes. "If he wants to reconcile, he knows where to find me. I know. And perhaps someday he will swallow his pride." Mrs. Patterson looked at the ranch, at the simple house and the surrounding land. "You look happy here, if you do not mind me saying so, happier than I ever saw you in your father's house." "I am happy, very happy." "Then I am glad you found the courage to leave. Your mother would have been proud of you." Mrs. Patterson climbed back into the carriage, then paused. "Take care of yourself, child, and congratulations on the baby." She drove away, leaving Natalie standing on the porch with a trunk full of her past life. Lucas came out to see what was happening, and together they carried the trunk inside. Natalie opened it slowly, running her hands over the silk dresses that seemed to belong to another person entirely. "Do you miss it?" Lucas asked quietly. "That life?" "No," Natalie said truthfully. "But I suppose it is nice to know it existed, that I am not imagining that I used to be someone different." Most of the dresses she packed away, too impractical for ranch life. But the jewelry she kept, thinking perhaps their daughter might want it someday. And the books she arranged on a shelf Lucas built for her, happy to have them back. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the Nevada landscape. The ranch was doing well, the cattle healthy and the land productive. They had paid back half of what they had borrowed from her mother's account and were on track to be completely debt-free within another year. Tom had proven so valuable that Lucas gave him a raise and began teaching him the more complex aspects of ranch management. In late April, Natalie went into labor. It started as a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified throughout the morning. Lucas rode into town at breakneck speed to fetch the doctor, then paced outside the bedroom while the doctor and a midwife he had brought along attended to Natalie. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the night. Natalie had never experienced pain like it, waves of agony that seemed endless. But she gritted her teeth and worked through it, drawing on the strength she had built up over months of ranch work. When the baby finally came in the early hours of the morning, her cry was strong and healthy. "You have a son," the doctor announced, placing the baby in Natalie's arms. Lucas was allowed in then, and Natalie watched his face as he saw their child for the first time. The wonder and love there were unmistakable. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one calloused finger, and the infant's fingers curled around it instinctively. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered. "You did so well, Natalie. I am so proud of you." "What should we name him?" Natalie asked, studying her son's tiny face. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, holding their child, Natalie knew what felt right. "What about Michael, after my mother's father? He was a rancher too before he passed away." "Michael Nash," Lucas said, testing how it sounded. "I like it. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the ranch." The baby slept, utterly unconcerned with his dramatic entrance into the world. Natalie felt exhausted but also exhilarated, high on the incredible experience of bringing new life into the world. She had done it. They had done it. They had built a life together, and now they had a son to carry it forward. Over the next few weeks, Natalie adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she had applied to learning ranch work. Michael was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he kept them both up at night with his feeding schedule. Lucas proved to be a surprisingly natural father, comfortable holding and soothing the infant in a way many men were not. "You are good at this," Natalie observed one night as Lucas walked Michael around the room, bouncing him gently. "I like it," Lucas admitted. "I always wanted children, but I thought I never would, that the ranch would die with me." "Now it has a future," Natalie said. "Our son will grow up here, learning the land the way you did. And maybe someday he will have his own children, brothers and sisters for him to play with." Natalie smiled. "One at a time, Lucas. Let me recover from this one first." But the idea pleased her. A house full of children, running across the ranch land, learning to ride and rope and help with the cattle. It was a far cry from the solitary childhood she had experienced in her father's quiet, oppressive house. News of Michael's birth reached White Pine, and several of their neighbors came to visit, bringing gifts and congratulations. Even some of the women who had initially been scandalized by Natalie's unconventional marriage now cooed over the baby and offered advice. It seemed that motherhood had finally made Natalie respectable in their eyes, or at least acceptable. One visitor who did not come was Richard Emerson. But one morning, about 2 weeks after Michael's birth, Natalie looked out the window and saw her father's carriage approaching. Her heart began to race. She called for Lucas, who came in from the barn wiping his hands on his pants. "My father is here," Natalie said. "You want me to send him away?" "No, I want to hear what he has to say." They went out onto the porch together, Natalie holding Michael in her arms. Richard Emerson stepped down from the carriage, looking strangely uncertain. He was dressed in his usual expensive suit, but something about his bearing seemed diminished. He stood at the base of the porch steps, looking up at them. "Natalie," he said, his voice rough, "I heard you had a child." "This is Michael," Natalie said, turning slightly so her father could see the baby's face. "Your grandson." Richard's expression crumpled slightly. "He looks like your mother around the eyes. Would you like to hold him?" The question seemed to surprise her father as much as it surprised Natalie. But she found that, despite everything, despite the harsh words and the disownment, she wanted her son to know his grandfather. She wanted to believe that people could change, could grow, could learn to be better. Richard climbed the porch steps slowly, and Natalie carefully transferred Michael into his arms. Her father held the baby awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. He looked down at Michael's small face, and Natalie saw tears gathering in his eyes. "I have been a fool," Richard said quietly. "A proud, stubborn fool. I thought I knew what was best for you, Natalie. I thought wealth and status were what mattered. But seeing you here, seeing how you look at your husband and your child, I realize I was wrong." Father, let me finish, please. Richard took a shaky breath. Your mother tried to tell me, years ago. She said there was more to life than money and appearances. But I did not listen. I thought providing for you materially was enough. I did not understand that you needed freedom and choice and love. The kind of love that respects rather than controls. He looked at Lucas, who had remained silent during this exchange. You are a good man, Lucas Nash, better than I gave you credit for. You let my daughter choose her own path. You work beside her as a partner rather than trying to own her. That is something I never learned how to do. Thank you, sir, Lucas said quietly. Richard turned back to Natalie. I cannot undo the things I said. I cannot give you back the months we have lost. But I would like to try to be a part of your life again, of Michael's life, if you will allow it. Natalie felt tears streaming down her face. Part of her wanted to refuse, to make her father feel a fraction of the pain he had caused her. But a larger part, the part that had grown and changed over the past year, knew that holding on to anger would only hurt herself. You are welcome to visit, she said, to get to know your grandson. But father, you need to understand this is my life now. The ranch, Lucas, our son. I am not going back to being the obedient daughter who does whatever you say. I know. I would not want you to. Richard carefully handed Michael back to Natalie. I will do better. I promise you that. I will try to be the kind of grandfather your mother would have wanted me to be. He left shortly after, but the visit marked a turning point. Richard came back the following week, and then the week after that. Gradually, cautiously, they began to rebuild their relationship. It was not the same as it had been before. It was better, more honest, built on mutual respect rather than control and obligation. Richard even began to help with the ranch in small ways, using his banking connections to help Lucas get better prices for his cattle and more favorable terms on the supplies they needed. It was his way of making amends. Natalie understood, and she accepted it with grace. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, growing into one of the most successful operations in the area. Lucas expanded the herd, built a larger barn, and even hired 2 more hands to help with the work. Natalie managed the household and the business side of things, proving to have a head for numbers that rivaled her father's. Michael grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. When he was 3, Natalie gave birth to a daughter they named Mary after Natalie's mother. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, named for Lucas's father. And finally, when Natalie was 30, came their youngest, a girl named Rebecca. The ranch house that had once seemed small now rang with the sounds of children laughing and arguing and playing. Lucas built additions to accommodate their growing family, and Natalie filled the rooms with love and warmth, and all the things she had missed in her own childhood. Richard Emerson became a devoted grandfather, visiting often and spoiling his grandchildren with gifts and attention. The rigid, controlling man he had been slowly mellowed into someone softer and more understanding. He and Natalie never quite achieved the easy intimacy that some fathers and daughters shared, but they built something real and meaningful out of the rubble of their broken relationship. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Natalie with a gift. He led her outside after dinner, the children already in bed, and showed her what he had been working on for months. It was a garden, but not like the vegetable garden they used for food. This was a flower garden, filled with roses and wildflowers and carefully tended plants arranged in beautiful patterns. You built this for me, Natalie asked, tears in her eyes. I wanted you to have something beautiful that was just yours, Lucas said. Something that was not about work or necessity, but just about joy. I know the ranch keeps you busy, but I never want you to forget that you deserve beautiful things too. Natalie threw her arms around her husband, kissing him thoroughly. Even after 10 years of marriage, he could still surprise her with his thoughtfulness and love. "You are the beautiful thing in my life, Lucas Nash. Everything else is just decoration." They stood in the garden together as the sun set over the Nevada mountains, watching the sky turn colors that seemed too bright to be real. Natalie thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago, standing in her father's bank in silk dresses she had not chosen, feeling hollow and trapped and desperate for something more. That woman would barely recognize her now. Natalie's hands were rough and scarred from years of hard work. Her face was tanned and lined from the sun. Her dresses were simple and practical, made for function rather than fashion. She had given up wealth and status and everything she was supposed to want, and in return, she had gained everything that actually mattered. A partner who respected and loved her, children who were growing up free and happy, work that challenged and fulfilled her, a life that was messy and hard and absolutely real. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his arm around her waist. "Everything," Natalie said. "How strange life is. How a single choice can change everything." "Do you regret it, that choice?" "Never," Natalie said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Choosing you, choosing this life, it was the best decision I ever made." "I am glad you picked the cowboy with dusty boots," Lucas said, smiling. "So am I. Though to be fair, your boots are much cleaner these days." Lucas laughed, pulling her closer. "Only because you make me take them off at the door." They walked back to the house together, past the vegetable garden where Natalie had first learned to grow food, past the barn where the cattle rested for the night, past all the physical markers of the life they had built together. Inside, their children were sleeping, safe and loved. The house smelled like the bread Natalie had baked that morning, and the soap she used to wash the floors, and the wildflowers Lucas had picked for the table. It was not a perfect life. There were still hard days and setbacks and struggles. Cattle still got sick sometimes. Droughts still threatened their water supply. Money was never quite as plentiful as Natalie had been used to in her father's house. But it was a real life, authentic and meaningful in ways her old existence had never been. Natalie climbed into bed next to her husband, curling into his warmth as she had done thousands of times before. Lucas's arms came around her automatically, holding her close. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I will never stop being grateful that you walked into my life." "I love you too," Natalie whispered back. "Thank you for showing me what real happiness looks like." As she drifted off to sleep, Natalie thought about her mother, who had saved money in secret, hoping to give her daughter choices. She thought about the silk dresses hanging unused in her father's house. She thought about Charles Whitmore and the life she would have had if she had followed the path laid out for her. And she was grateful, so deeply grateful, that she had found the courage to choose differently. To pick the cowboy with dusty boots and the failing ranch and the uncertain future. Because that choice had led her here, to this moment, to this life full of love and work and meaning. Years continued to pass in their gentle rhythm. Michael grew into a responsible young man who took to ranching as naturally as his father had, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. Mary proved to have her grandmother's head for numbers and began managing the ranch's finances when she was barely 18. Thomas and Rebecca were still finding their paths, but both showed the same work ethic and determination that defined their parents. Lucas's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes from decades of squinting into the Nevada sun. Natalie's dark hair gained threads of silver, and her hands bore the permanent marks of a lifetime of work. But they remained devoted to each other, their partnership only strengthening with time. The ranch expanded to include several hundred acres, making it one of the largest operations in the region. Lucas became known as a fair employer and a shrewd businessman, respected throughout Nevada's ranching community. Natalie became something of a legend herself, the banker's daughter who had given up everything to marry a cowboy and had built an empire in the process. Richard Emerson passed away when Natalie was 38, leaving his bank and his considerable fortune to his daughter, despite their complicated history. Natalie used some of the inheritance to expand the ranch further and donated the rest to establish a school in White Pine, wanting to give other young people the education and choices she had fought so hard to achieve. The bank itself she gave to Michael, who sold it and used the money to buy more cattle and improve the ranch's infrastructure. "I would rather build something new than maintain what grandfather created," he explained, and Natalie understood completely. On the afternoon of Natalie's 50th birthday, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Her children were all there, along with several grandchildren who ran shrieking through the house and gardens just as their parents had done. Friends and neighbors came from all over, bringing food and gifts and warm wishes. Lucas found Natalie standing on the porch, watching the sunset and the festivities with a contented smile. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy birthday, my love." "Thank you. This is perfect. You remember the first time you came to this ranch. You were wearing that blue dress and riding a borrowed horse, and you had this wild idea about helping me save this place." Natalie laughed. "I had no idea what I was doing. I am amazed you agreed to marry me." "I am amazed you asked. You were so brave, Natalie, so determined to make your own choices even when everyone told you that you were wrong." "I was terrified," Natalie admitted. "I thought I might be making the biggest mistake of my life. But you were not. No. I was making the best decision of my life. I just did not know it yet." They stood together watching the sun set over the land they had built together, the ranch that had started as a desperate measure to save a failing property and had grown into a legacy they would pass down through generations. The cattle grazed in the distance, fat and healthy. The gardens bloomed with vegetables and flowers. The house rang with laughter and love. "No regrets?" Lucas asked softly. "Not a single one," Natalie said. "I picked you, Lucas Nash. I picked this life. And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Lucas turned her in his arms and kissed her, slow and sweet and full of decades of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, Natalie could see the same wonder in his eyes that had been there on their wedding day, as if he still could not quite believe that she had chosen him. But she had. The banker's daughter with her silk dresses and hollow life had picked the cowboy with dusty boots and a failing dream. And together, they had built something extraordinary. Not wealth or status or any of the things her father had thought were important, but something far more valuable. A life filled with honest work, genuine partnership, and love that grew deeper with every passing year. As the stars began to appear in the Nevada sky, and their family gathered around them, Natalie reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From her father's marble-floored bank to this ranch house full of laughter and life. From silk dresses and empty days to calloused hands and work that mattered. From a future planned by others to a life she had chosen for herself. It had not been easy. There had been struggles and setbacks and moments of doubt. But every challenge had been worth it for the life they had created together. For the partnership they had forged, the family they had raised, the legacy they would leave behind. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children and grandchildren had settled into their rooms, Natalie and Lucas sat on their porch one last time. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional sound of cattle moving in the darkness, and the wind rustling through the gardens. "Thank you," Natalie said suddenly. "For what? For accepting me. For letting me choose this life. For being the kind of man who sees his wife as a partner rather than a possession." Lucas took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Thank you for choosing me. For taking a chance on a failing ranch and a cowboy who had nothing to offer but hard work and an uncertain future." "You offered me everything that mattered," Natalie corrected. "Freedom and respect and real love. That is worth more than all the silk dresses and crystal chandeliers in the world." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had spent 30 years learning each other's rhythms and needs, who could communicate in glances and touches as much as in words. The ranch spread out around them in the darkness, every acre a testament to their determination and love. Natalie thought about her mother, who had hidden money away hoping to give her daughter choices. She thought about that leather journal with its heartbreaking entries, a mother's desperate wish for her daughter to have the freedom she herself had never known. "I did it, Mama," Natalie whispered into the night. "I found the life you wanted for me." Lucas squeezed her hand, understanding even without knowing exactly what she was thinking. That was the gift of a long, true partnership, knowing each other so deeply that words became almost unnecessary. As they finally went inside to sleep, Natalie took one last look at the ranch she had helped build from near ruins into a thriving legacy. She thought about the young woman she had been, standing in her father's bank and seeing Lucas Nash for the first time. She thought about the moment she had decided to risk everything for a chance at something real, and she knew with absolute certainty that every sacrifice had been worth it. Every blister, every ache, every moment of doubt and fear, all of it had led to this. To a life rich in love and meaning and purpose. To 4 beautiful children and several grandchildren carrying forward the legacy she and Lucas had built. To decades of genuine partnership with a man who had shown her what real love looked like. The banker's daughter had picked the cowboy with dusty boots, and in doing so, she had found herself. She had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. She had learned that happiness did not come from wealth or status, but from living authentically, working hard for something you believed in, and building a life based on mutual respect and genuine love. As Natalie drifted off to sleep in Lucas's arms, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, she felt complete contentment wash over her. This was home. This was happiness. This was the life she had chosen, and she would not trade it for anything in the world. The stars shone bright over the Nevada landscape, watching over the ranch where a banker's daughter and a cowboy had defied expectations and built something beautiful. Where silk dresses had given way to work-worn cotton, where hollow social obligations had transformed into genuine purpose, and where a desperate gamble had blossomed into a love story that would be remembered for generations. Natalie Nash fell asleep smiling, her hand clasped in her husband's, knowing that she had lived exactly the life she was meant to live. She had chosen courage over comfort, authenticity over appearances, and love over wealth. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference.